Hello and welcome to the Varietal Show. If you've never been here before, well, I hope this sounds better than it was on Tuesday. Um, Let me know if it isn't. Yeah, if you've never been here before, what we're doing on this stream is playing a solo tabletop RPG with the goal of making some sort of story out of the prompts and roles that we get. What we're doing tonight is actually a little bit different than I normally do, and I'll get to why that is in a minute. Trying to figure out why my audio is low. Oh well, that's a problem for off-stream, Rory. Anyways, if you're not watching this live, the great advantage that you have is you can skip over such compelling things as me fiddling with wires. And click down in the description below because there'll be timestamps that take you to key points in the stream where we discuss the game that we're playing and the rules, maybe where the writing starts, or maybe you just want to know the story we came up with. All of those will be timestamped. Feel free to go to whatever interests you. But if you are here live, you're stuck with the fiddling wires, but while I fiddle with those wires, you will be able to join that live chat, which has already taken by. And you folks, I think, will enjoy your time there. There's already a few people joining in, and I see Witchery, GS, Jumstore, Genera, and Zombie Wolf. Good to see you folks again. Zombie Wolf says I'm technically not late. You're never late to a stream. You only arrive when you would need to. Witchery says, did the computer act cursed on Tuesday? No. I just failed to adjust a setting since I switched computers, and it hadn't really mattered because we hadn't been doing a lot of like desktop audio mixing stuff in our stories, but there was a lot of desktop audio in the stories of last Tuesday, and the overall volume for it wasn't set as low as normal, but it sounds the same to me because I'm on a separate feed. That's just the weird way that streaming works. So after the stream, I mean, you can hear it, but it's just not as clear as I would have wanted my voice to be. Zombie Wolf says, yes, I go by Gandalf rules. Tammy says, sorry, I'm running a little slow tonight. That's okay. I've been running a little slow for my entire life. People keep hanging out with me, so I wouldn't worry about it. Really wish I could get all my audio back. I need a new headphone cable. All right. I'm going to explain what we're doing. What we're doing is a little more, it's not really what we typically do per se. I mean, it will ultimately boil down, but how I'm approaching it is different, and I'm going to explain why right now. This part of the show is called litgames, which stands, of course, for literature games, which is my sort of catch-all term for solo tabletop RPGs, lyric games. There's like 50,000 different names for them, so I just call them all litgames, because we're using them to write stories. Now, normally, what I do on this stream is I feature one game, and we go through it, and I sort of do my own take on it, and we have fun with that story. And we're still going to basically be doing that, but the problem I ran into is I had a hankering for something that was about folklore horror. And when I was searching around itch.io and DM's Guild and all these places, trying to find something that sort of fit that rhythm, I just couldn't find anything that quite worked. It's not that they don't exist. A lot of it is that I kind of disagree with how people frame folklore horror. So a lot of it was stuff I just didn't want to do for that reason. But the other reason why I kind of like didn't like it is that a lot of it was just too crunchy and complicated for the stream. Which I don't mind, by the way. In my private life, I like crunchy games. Like I play, Pathfinder 2e and stuff like that. But on the stream, it doesn't really work. So in that searching around, I found this. Now, what you're looking at right now looks like a lot of nonsense. I understand that. But what this is was put together by a creator whose name I've completely forgotten, and I really should have written down. They're on itch.io, and it's these single-page solo tabletop RPG sheets, where they have the character sheet on one side, and they have little prompts for the dice for the locations, and a hexcrawl in the middle, and discoveries you can make. And some of them are not showing up on the map, but let me zoom right out. You can sort of see the basic shape of them. But you see how many little rolling tables they have of things you can find, stuff you can encounter, narrative shifts, oracles, as they're called, are on here. And I was really interested, and so I looked into the system that this was originally made for, which is called White Box, I believe. It's an OSR system. It's not a particularly obscure one, just not one I was particularly familiar with until I found this. OSR stands for Old School Rules, I believe. The R is where I'm uncertain. I know the OS is old school. And what it's referring to is old school D&D. And it's for people that, yes, agree that maybe first edition D&D and second edition D&D needed a bit of updating. But that overall, it captured something that later editions sort of lost. And for the most part, OSR seems to resent how weedy and complex the system's got. So it tends to be simpler. So I spent the afternoon reading White Box, and it was an interesting system. I would run it. It is basically D&D. It's a D20 system with the same stats and all of that. It's just simpler. The rules or revolution or revival. Okay, revival. That's the other version of it. But the thing is again, it was a little too complex for the stream, and I wasn't 100% that it was keyed towards solo play. I'm sure it is. I just couldn't find confirmation, and that's tough because if I come here and I go and I solo play, and there's some, I pull a villain and there's just no chance that we're going to defeat it. That's not fun. But I liked all of these tables, and none of these tables were tied to the specifics of that game, really, other than some of the villains. And so I was like, okay, well, if I did a Hexcrawl and I recast it as a folklore horror theme where we interpret all these things in folklore terms, what system would work? And I remembered an old classic that we haven't been back to in a while, Pocket Hex. You guys might not even remember this. Pocket Hex is a lovely system for exactly this kind of thing, where you're like, just need a little bit of mechanics, but not too much. The Pocket Hex is a system that I'll remind you how it's played in a minute, but it is a hex crawl, and basically we distribute across a few stats, and if we roll over or under, depending on what the villain is and what thing we're doing. And of course that involves us using our hex map, and maybe you'll remember this little character. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this little and I have this little guy travel some hexes to try and find his sister, who went into the forest maybe to collect berries or something and did not come back. And now the sun's going down and he's got to go and search for her. And he knows the Fae are out and about. And I feel like that is basically what we're going to do. Zombie Wolf asks if I checked on Parasite. I did briefly look at it. I haven't had a chance to read it, and as I said, I won't be able to read and check stories until pretty close to the day of. I have a thing that is taking my time over the next 2 weeks. A good thing, but it takes a lot of my time. So I won't really be able to sit down and read it. I'll have to do sort of a cram session a couple of days before, and we'll see what I come up with. But it was interesting. I liked the concept that I looked over. Witchery says, isn't Pocket Hex the one where we killed the poor bastard? Look, he killed himself by being an idiot. We had an idiot. He was the traveling salesman, and he was an idiot. Yeah, he made it 1 hex and got killed. The other thing that you may not remember, but I'm going to remind you, I don't know if we'll make use of this. We'll see how it goes. But as a part of this, shortly after playing this the first time, we did this, which was we created monsters for this system. You guys remember that? That was almost a year ago. We created little monsters and like guinea pigs. You remember guinea pigs? So if because we have to pick monsters at some point, I think we will. I don't know. We'll see what we come up with. So the gist of it is I'm mashing together a few different things to create a game I couldn't find. And that's really the spirit of tabletop RPGs in a nutshell. Oh, I forgot to transition it. So that boring description leads us right into another one where we have to remember, we have to make our character, which is pretty simple in this system. And then we got to start writing and moving our hex and rolling some prompts. The only rule here is we need to interpret things in terms of folklore horror. That is the point. Folklore horror doesn't have to be outright horror. It can be really uncanny, weird things or whatever else. That's one of the problems that I had with some of the systems for folklore horror I found, is that it was just outright very gruesome. I don't feel like that is necessarily how this stuff goes. Jess says Rory's mashing tonight. Yes, we are mashing up two things. We're mashing up Pocket Hex and a map and system that was made for White Cube, and then we're ignoring the themes of both to insert folklore horror in what is, I'm sure, going to be an unpopular stream. Okay, let's make our character. So I've already had the premise. It's someone who needs to go into the forest and look for a sibling. Who, it's definitely medieval era. I don't want any modern stuff for this story. It's a medieval era, like peasant near a dark forest kind of thing. Agrarian era Europe. But within that context, we have some things we can play with. Do we want to say it's a brother or a sister, for example, or what their name is, or something like that? That's weird that the YouTube app is crashing, because if there's one thing I can say about YouTube is that their app is, among the streaming services, probably the best. Like, the Twitch app is terrible, and I don't know why. All right, let's make our character, because I don't want to do that thing where nothing happens. How am I gonna get this? I hate it when they do this. You guys can't see it. Okay, character creation requires us to name our character. Our HP is 10. Our IS is 8. I gotta remember what that is. I made the decision to switch to Pocket Hex pretty late, so I'm gonna have to remind myself of some stuff. Your inventory scores. How many items you can carry without limitations. For each item that exceeds that, subtract 1 from your strength or dex rolls. Okay. I'm not really looking to be heroic either, so they can be pretty, like, weak. Which was another reason why I didn't really want to use White Cube, or whatever it was called, or White Box, for this in particular, but I might use it for something else. I wanted that disempowerment, and I wanted us to be dealing with these creatures more the way that you see in folklore tales, where they don't outright fight them, but we kind of have to bargain or trick our way out of trouble. Norberg, Gina says. Okay, Norberg. Okay, and then we have to distribute 3 points between these classes. So let me get those classes for you. I mean, they are what you think they're going to be. Strength, good at smacking. Dex, good at sneaking. And intelligence, good at reading, perception, and speaking. So we have to distribute 3 points between the classes. You know what? I could probably reasonably do this as a poll. So I suspect that this is going to be a poll that's a little confusing, but let's see if I can make it work. And if I can't, I can't. Start poll here. Stat distribution question mark. So strength 1. I'm just gonna sort of pick ones that I think are appropriate here, and then we can sort of pick from that selection. Strength 1, Dex 1, Intelligence 1, Strength 0, Dex 2, Intelligence 1, 0, 1, Intelligence 2. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it there. And starting the poll. So the first option there is putting a point in each. The second option is putting 2 of our points in Dex and 1 of our points in Intelligence. That's an I, not an L. And then the last one is putting no points in Strength, putting 1 in Dex and 2 in Intelligence. The reason why I don't have a version for the Strength, where it bears the 2, is because you were a child. I don't think Strength should be our stat. Also, I don't think it really fits with what I'm trying to do, which is a disempowered child wandering a dark forest in a Hexcrawl. So go ahead and vote on the distribution. In other words, do you want us to be a little dumber and better at sneaking, or a little smarter but clumsier at sneaking? If you want the sort of clumsier version, you pick the last option. And if you want the sneakier version, pick the middle option, and if you just want to split the difference, pick the first option. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes there as we discuss our non-sponsor, Zevia. Vanilla Cola. And you know it's vanilla because it says so on the can. And who am I to disagree just because I don't taste it? I don't know what it says about me that I roast a pop I continue to drink. Jess says, I bought glow-in-the-dark nail polish today. Waiting for the dark. I don't have high hopes. You know, it is weird. Glow-in-the-dark can be like utter nonsense. Just garbage. Faint. If it's this close, you can see it. And then sometimes you get something, and it's not even like you paid a lot for it. And you turn the light and you turn it off, and you're like, that is so bright. I don't know if I can sleep with that in my room. Jumpstart says, Rory, why do you keep punishing yourself? It's not as bad as I make it out to be. I mean, I like pretty much anything carbonated. But it is weird to me, some of the choices they make. Witchery says, I like clever but less sneaky than they think. GS said you said it was a gift. I mean, in a sense, yes. Witchery says, oh, there's a poll. LMAO. Are you still not able to use the poll? I know there was a bit of trouble about that. Looks like the poll's tied right now, so I'm gonna wait for a bit of a tiebreaker. Or I'll be the tiebreaker. I know which one I prefer. Witchery says I didn't show up. Zombie Wolf, Zevia, the drink that will have you asking, is tap water available? No, I got it, but it hit itself. Oh, okay. Well, we're split down the middle. That's a shame. Because it means the decision falls to me. Alright, ending the poll. Straight split between the even distribution of the stats and the uneven distribution of the stats. Well, I'm gonna stick with my vision then of somebody with no strength and go with the uneven distribution. Is there anybody still getting stuck in the storms down south there? For those of you in the States? I certainly hope not. Looks like it was quite the storm. There we go. Okay. Now, the last thing we have to do is choose 3 items. We can choose a weapon, a ranged weapon, a piece of armor, or a cloak, or one of these many big lists of stuff about, you know, alchemy sets and birds and, for some reason, bottled toad saliva. I feel like we should probably have like a dagger. Maybe not really meant for battling, but that's all we have, like a sort of kitchen knife. I don't know what we would have for armor. It was raining here yesterday, I guess, Zombie Wolf, and then today was actually pretty warm. We had the strangest sky a couple of days ago. Yesterday was peach colored and had rainbows. It was really quite nuts. Like truly peach. It was very strange. Well, we need a cloak at least. Parents' jacket for armor. Oh, cool. Yeah. Dad's leather jacket. Dad's leather jacket. Jumpstore says it's been pretty sunny and warm. It was nearly 80 degrees Fahrenheit just the other day. Now I gotta look up what that is. I don't know what that is. 80 Fahrenheit Celsius. Oh wow, 26. 26 degrees Celsius. Dad's leather jacket. A large kitchen knife. And we get one more thing. What else do we want to bring into the woods with us to deal with the Fae and find our lost sister? GS says Australian oilcloth. Oh, good point. Was Witchery's recommendation after all. Trained mouse. Oh, that's cute. Trained mouse in my pocket. Okay. I think that's all we have to do to set a character up in this system. I remember my impression of this system was that like it maybe wasn't the most balanced, but that it was straightforward and it had a clever way of dealing with checks. Okay. There's a thing about time pools, which usually measure days. I'm gonna kind of ignore that right now, but for people who might be curious and didn't watch my Pocket Hex before, you basically use a D6, a certain amount of them, and you roll it down one every time a day passes. But for us, I don't know. I'll have one here for hours, I guess. But we're doing this overnight. Jumpstora says, mice don't live very long, though. Well, this one lives an unusually long time. Zombie Wolf says it's dangerous to go alone. Take this with you, and it holds out a cat. I can't imagine a more useless thing for something like this than my cat. Okay. Maybe he's like Jiminy Cricket, but the opposite. Maybe he's like, secretly damning our souls. Devil mouse. Okay, right. I just gotta remind myself what dice we use for this. 2d6? Yeah. And then you add the total of your skill. Okay. And I think we get, for the large kitchen knife, if we do combat, we get a +1 to strength. I don't know that anything really, maybe just a -1 to damage. I don't remember if that even works. And maybe this is a +1 to intelligence. Alright. In this scenario, you'd only rolled an 8, so it's only taken 4 damage. Okay. Let's read the example together and remind myself, and then we'll get to playing, because I think we're basically there. A giant cement worm, this is their example of a round. Bares its concrete teeth at you with hissing, rumbling boulders. It has a difficulty score of 12. You attack, rolling 2d6 and get 9, but then add 2 from your brute class score, 1 from your sword, and 1 from your shield. Your total is 13. 13, your full roll, versus 12, its difficulty score equals 1, so the cement worm takes 1 point of damage. Okay, I'm remembering this now. All foes' difficulty scores is also their health points. That's right, so it gets easier to hit them as they get lower. So now the cement worm's DS is 11. In this scenario, you've only rolled an 8. You would have had, if you'd only rolled an 8, you would have taken 4 damage because you take, that's right, whatever you roll minus whatever their score is. Okay. And then checks can be done by difficulty score guidelines, I think, as well. I don't think there's much else I need to do. Yeah, okay. Because I'm not strictly using Pocket Hex, let's write our intro and then use that other sheet and roll some stuff and find out what we find. The sun was getting low and melting into ever saturated. Hues, rose, and fire. And another word for orange. Like a gemstone or something. Talking about how they used radiation to make things glow back in the day. I mean, technically, we still can use radiation to make things glow. Citrine? Citrine's orange, isn't it? I'm gonna double check now. Yeah, citrine is that sort of browny orange. So let's open with the hook. She was supposed to be back by now. The shadows, the forest were growing black as the void. She had said she knew exactly where the berries grew. She said it would be quick. Oh, cool. Jumpstore says my library is hosting... By the way, libraries... I feel like Gen Z got robbed of libraries. Maybe I'm wrong. But libraries are fantastic, especially when you're young. Not just for books either. They're just like a nice space. My library is hosting some fun Halloween-themed events for the month of October. That's fun. And one is a writing workshop where they help you write spooky stories. I went ahead and registered for it. I'm excited. That's excellent. I'm glad to hear it, Jumpstore. If you get there though, and it's a lot of kids, you gotta mind what you're writing. Standing up in front of like 11-year-olds being like, I don't know if an artery really sprays this much, but I like the image of it. It had not been quick. What was his name? Norberg. Was alone on the family farm. Petting... What is the pet mouse name? Give me a name for the pet mouse. Petting his little trained mouse and watching intently the tree line that wrapped around the cornfield. Gia says, Mom, that lady is scaring me. Witchery says, Dexter taught me how blood spatter works and he would never lie to me. Yeah, no, if there's one thing psychopaths are known for, it's their truthfulness, especially in television. Ooh, we got a vote from Matthew. Let me know if that's wrong. For Horatio. Okay. And there was a vote from Zombie Wolf for Aeneas and Gilbert. We're going to go with Horatio because it's in there. Fine. You want it that way, you can have it that way. Horatio. And intently watching the tree line that wrapped around the cornfield. As the last glimmers of dusk colored the low clouds. The trees became a black wall. The dark forest was said to be a place rife with strange breaches from the uncanny and fey realms. The grove, which stretched as wide east as it did west, endlessly wide. Stretched as endlessly wide east as it did west. Was the backdrop to 1,000 bards' tales of foolish folk meeting strange ends. But she still wasn't back. And he was her brother. So he fetched his mother's sharpest kitchen knife, his father's thickest hide jacket, slipped Horatio into its pocket. With a handful he would have to venture on. Scroll that up. Into the dark woods at dusk. Okay, now we get to the hex crawling. I bought some South Korean beauty products. I swear I'm not vain. I'm just genuinely want to see how much of what I heard is hype. I mean, I'm sure it's not all hype. It's all about market, right? Like if you have a lot of market for something. Okay. Maybe I'll show you the hex first. Oh, there's two options, and that's perfect for a poll. This will be a short one. Which hex? Top one. Bottom one. I'll only leave this open for a couple of minutes. And then once we pick it, I'll start rolling for it. Whether the art does influence it in Pocket Hex proper. Like this does have a bit of a layout to it, but in this version of it, where we're mashing it together with those other tables I found, it may or may not. For the most part, it's kind of an arbitrary choice. Zevia, the ketchup of tomatoes. I like that, especially the way I phrased it, makes no sense. Oh my god, it is 50% again. We are an indecisive group. And I flipped my Metroid coin. Ending the poll. That decided nothing. Okay, so red we go to the top, blue we go to the bottom. Oops. It's red. Go to the top. We need a 7th voter. No kidding. I think we probably do. I mean, we definitely have that many people watching. It's just more than that many people watching. I just don't think everybody's voting, which is fine. You don't have to vote. It's not an obligation this turn. Okay. Unfortunately, God, I'm having such a tough time getting all of this on here. But I think you can see most of what matters. You can't see the topics of these, but that doesn't matter. So it's D6s. Of which I obviously have many. Technically, I only need one. Okay, so first of all, explore a die. Whether you find something. We don't find anything. Our terrain is woods, but we'll see if there's some variation. Swamp. Okay. New terrain is the next one, but we're not doing that. Water, we just got swamp, so I'm not rolling that. Weather, I will roll that. 6 is snow. No, it's not snowing. Not in a swamp, in a forest, when I've already established that. 3, fog. Okay. Let me get those notes down before I forget. Swamp. Fog. Okay, now there's some other sheets I want to look at. Those are the basic ones. Discoveries. There's unnatural, natural. How can I get this on here? I guess I'm gonna just have to adjust this. Oh no, that's not working. How weird. Okay. And I knew it was gonna be tough to get it on here. I didn't think it was gonna be this tough. Okay. Our discoveries are unnatural, natural, settlement, evidence. We're not going to find a settlement unless it's going to be like a Fey village. And the two you can't see are ruins and passive stuff. And then there's some dangers, and then there is encounters and stuff that go on down here. And then there's a whole other sheet that I'm not really going to touch just yet. That gives us some more options for rolling. Okay, so for the sake of time, even though we rolled that there was no encounter, we're going to have an encounter of something. So of these 6, what interests chat? Unnatural, natural, ruins, a settlement, evidence, or something passive. Which is, they list as like wounded, traveler, merchant, camp, cleric, animal, stuff like that. We're in a swamp in the fog, FYI. I mean, I hesitate to put this as a poll because with 6 options, you might all vote for one. Matthew says settlement. Okay. Gotta vote for settlement. Give people a moment to tell me if there's something else they want. Fey settlement, itty bitty. Okay. 2 votes is good enough for me. Let's roll that. It's a town, so it's on the larger side. Okay. Think about this for a minute. It was nary an hour. Dropping a nary in there early on. It was nary an hour into his searching. Norberg's voice was already hoarse and calling to his lost sister. He was growing more timid and quiet, though, as the low sun slipped away, painting faint scarlet on the tall tips of pines which brought the dark walls, the forest, the void of a dark forest to the very tip, the very point of his nose. Oh, Horatio. Why didn't we bring along a torch or something? Norberg whispered to the mouse in his pocket. Witchery says darkness under the eye or eye bags in general can be genetic. That is true. I have dark circles, but they sure got a lot less dark when I discovered I was celiac and stopped eating gluten. We'll say sometimes it's more than that. Horatio squeaked. Norberg felt this was a judgment from the little rodent and hissed, "Well, I didn't hear you offer up that advice when I could act on it. Did I?" The darkness brought every sound closer. Every whisper of night, of wind across the feathers of a diving owl. Was as if Norberg was the mouse itself in the under. Well, the mouse is going to be confusing. Was the prey it swooped upon. Every crack of a stick under the paw of some unseen beast sounded as if it were right before him. And every whisper of a voice was right in his ear. Norberg paused. Froze in place. His feet were now sinking into Yeah, I agree, GS. I think there should be something ultimately uncanny and unwelcoming about it. His feet were now sinking into the thick mud of the ever swift glade swamp. He dared not move, though, for there was a whisper in his ear, and it formed the words, "Thirsty boy needs a drink, I think." The glade, or the swamp, was thick with a fog. He felt most in how it chilled the air. Though the last glimmers of sunset were suspended in its haze as well. From the corner of his eye, near the center of the swamp, he saw the silhouette of a many-legged creature. It moved as he moved, and stood still as he did. He turned to discern it better through the fog, but it was as if the veil was drawn closed when he looked straight at it. No, he only saw the crawling things about him in the edges of his eyes. Sight. Catching the sunlight and slipping into the fog before he could grasp their nature. Skinny thing can do if they fatten up on stew, whispered something into his other ear. Spittle of overwhelming saliva dripped down his neck, and the hot breath gave way back to the cool fog. Sorry, I'm just trying to like map some geography here. I realize it's not the most compelling thing to watch a man think, but Norberg's Horatio squeaked at that a few times, which was confirmation enough that this was not in his imagination. GS says, where there's a wolf, there's a way. I like that. I'll try to work that in. The patter of many feet each slapping along the mud behind him told him something was circling. He could not stand sinking in the mud any longer. Jumpstore says it's not a compelling thing to watch a man think. Rory, there's literally a statue called the Thinker, which is exactly that. I mean, I don't think I'm a carving. He cannot stand sinking in the mud. Stand there, I guess I should say. Like, literally stand. The flurry of whispers slapping feet. And spittle across his neck compelled him to surge his steps, pull his steps from the sucking muck, and slowly push forward. As he did, the shadows in the corner of his eye grew larger. He turned and curved back towards the center of the swamp. The steps needed to grow higher, needed to stretch higher as the looser soil sunk him deeper. The weeds grabbed at his feet, and somewhere along somewhere in the breathless hustle. His shoes were stolen, leaving his toes to feel the writhing insects, writhing critters that infested the swamp basin. Still, the thing shadows grew dimmer as he stepped towards the thickest areas, the center of the swamp. Talking about walking our dogs. I haven't had a dog in a while, but I used to have a little pug. I think I mentioned this before. His name was Pumbaa. And there's lots of dogs in my family. Boston Terriers, Pomeranians. Probably one of the biggest dogs I ever had was a Borzoi. It's also called a Russian Wolfhound, and despite its appearance being a tough, big hound that was bred in Russia to kill wolves, if you touched his feet, he'd be like, don't touch my feet. It was like the daintiest dog we've ever owned. Jumpstore says, damn if that isn't a good name for a pug. Yeah, I thought so too. And I came up with it when I was like 9 or 10 years old, so like this was a while ago that I had this dog. Still the shadows creeping in the corner of his eye faded as he stepped towards the center of the swamp, so he continued on into the fog until the lilies were brushing at his chin, and Horatio had retreated to his head. The deadfall in the swamp bumped, startled him as it bumped past in the pitch black. The writhing basin burrowed into his toes, and the weeds Strangled. Pulled at his legs as if to drown him. It was then Horatio let out a squeak, and the pair saw the fog turn a milky white. As if some dim candlelight laid ahead. On his tiptoes, bouncing on his tiptoes to keep his mouth from the foul-smelling water. Very creative spelling. Norberg whispered, "Someone there? On a raft?" And as if being summoned from his own imagination, a raft floated into view. Do we have a preference what kind of fae is on this raft? Are we going to do the little gray man thing? Are we going to do the Cornish piskies, which tend to be playful, sometimes a little murderous, but mostly fine? We want to do something in the Celtic, like specifically Irish tradition, like the more like leprechauns or the boggards. Is that what they're called? No. Blending that with an English thing. Did we want to go with the Swedish Niske, I think it's called, or the little cone hats? Did we want to do the German kobolds, not the English kobolds, the German kobolds, the helpful ones? I'm just talking sort of like appearance. Some little thing on a raft that might try to sell him something or trick him or something like that. On it was a GS says cone hat, Zombie Wolf says kobolds. This one's going to be a little meaner than a traditional kobold, but if you want to know how German kobolds are traditionally represented, why, you're on the right channel, because we have Fireside Fairy Tales, which happens every Tuesday, and we have an episode, there's a whole playlist of them, but we have an episode about kobolds in Germany, which are very different than the kobolds for the namesake of the metal, the ones that live in mines in England. They're more like house spirits. And as if being summoned from his own imagination, a raft floated into view. On it was a steaming pot. Stuck out the top with the thick handle of a crudely whittled... I've forgotten the name for this. Ladle, my god. Jumpstore says, lol, Rory Cash plugging his other live stream. Well, I am, because, like, I don't know whether people are getting into Halloween later this year, but normally there's a better response to the Fireside Fairy Tales this time of year. And it's been a really, like, minimal response so far. So, never miss a chance to pitch. Of course, if people just don't like it this year, I'll just have to figure out what was different. On it was a steaming pot stuck out the top with the thick handle of a crudely whittled ladle. Small gray hand. Stubby and misshapen as a toddler's. Was stirring it. As Zombie Wolf says, just wait till Rory gets sponsored, probably by Zevia, given his illustrious praise of the product. Smoothest transitions, I have no doubt. Yeah, I'll be like, well, today's story didn't go very well. But sometimes not doing something very well is enough to build a brand on. So try Zevia. They did their best. The raft moved on a lazy breeze that stirred the fog to swirls around the candle on its deck. Zombie Wolf says that was a sick burn, Rory. Glad we have it on video for posterity. GS says they are the best stories in artwork. Don't know how they couldn't like it. People just aren't seeing it because of the algorithm. Yeah, I mean, maybe. Maybe. It's always hard to read, you know, what the general world is in the mood for when you come around to this. As it did, the cooking pot slowly pulled past and revealed a small but tired looking little creature with a cone hat sagging in the humidity of its cooking. It looked down at Norberg. That took me a minute. And the mouse upon his head. Was treading water. Its eyes reflected the candle like a cat's. And in the fog around him, Norberg saw a dozen further pairs light up. It was a strange town of these shrunken folk, each looking more tired than curious as they floated by in their buildings, their odd thatched buildings suspended on rafts. The first spooned a ladle from the pot and quietly said, "Have some stew." I offer some stew if you'll pass me the driftwood near you. Norberg knew his tales well enough to not be so foolish as to eat the food of the Fae. Jess says Rory gets sued. I guess I should clarify. The vanilla cola is actually pretty fine, but the their regular cola. So cola is like almost like I'm aware of it. I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna get the pedants in the chat going. Cola is basically a chai tea. Now, I am aware that the word chai basically means tea, but when I say chai tea, what I mean is in the Western sense, like Indian hard spice tea. Coca-Cola and all the variations are basically that, with a bunch of sugar and carbonation. And depending on the brand, maybe some peppermint oil. So as a result, you know, when you get different brands, there's a different balance of those sort of oils from the hard spices in them. And for some reason, Zevia decided that what cola really is cinnamon pop. It's just cinnamon. There's none of that sort of complexity that you get out of the bigger brands. Yet, he did not wish to upset the creature. And so waved away the stew, explaining he was full of bread already, but grabbed the soft, swampy wood and handed it to him. Yeah, true, zombie wolf. That is a thing if you go to, apparently it gets mixed with orange juice, somebody told me. It's weird, I guess. Having not had it, I don't really know how that would mix. My understanding is it just tastes like chemicals. But grabbed the soft swampy wood and handed it to him. It was then, in the dim light, in the dim candlelight, that painted the fog white. That Norberg saw the driftwood was the cyanotic limb of some dismembered man. Before he could drop it in horror, something rose out of the water behind the tired little kobold and snapped the limb with its jaws. It was then the shape of things became more clear. The kobolds were stuck with long strands of a viscous fluid. and dangling. Dangling from the canopy over the deep swamp. Arising from the water was a many-eyed and many-limbed creature with pale, porous skin. And the mandibles of a great wolf spider. As the creature arose up from the shadows and depths of the swamp, tapping its limbs across the decks of the rafts. Norberg understood it to be a pink-fleshed spider the size of a cottage. The Fae it had trapped to either feed or draw folks in, it seemed. And the slapping steps from the shore were from its most comical feature, a foot with 5 toes at the end of every spidery limb. But you'll be so tasty if you got a bit fatter, little meat man. Whisper. The creature whispered. The kobolds dangling around him with fear. In their eyes. And the wet of tears on their cheeks. A little stew for my stew. It was then that the swamp began to warm, and Horatio squeaked repeatedly. It was, after all, no swamp at all. He had tread into a great big stew pot, buried in the glade of the forest. The spider cackled as the fog turned to steam. Take a deep one, Horatio. Norberg blurted out, cupped his hand over his head, and dove underneath into the grim water. As the basin grew bright orange from the building heat, Norberg could see the grasping vines were the web-bound bodies of unfortunate souls that had wandered into this trap. Their eyes were cloudy, and some had clearly been chewed upon, simmering for an eternity. In this disguised swamp. The surface above rippled under the searching spindly limbs. Wait, the spindly limbs. Oh, there's a fight next door, zombie wolf. Oh, wow. Hopefully it's only sticking to words. Surface above rippled under the spindly legs, searching the basin. Silt and corpses for Norberg. Alright, chat. I realize that took me a little bit to get to, but now we have the question. how do we want to get out of this? So we will roll 2d6. We add a stat. We have intelligence, strength, and dexterity. Intelligence being our best stat right now. And I said that the mouse gave us an extra point to a roll. And if so, you know, whatever ability you choose, how do you frame it in our escape from the man spider? GS bought a monster pin for the Bride of Frankenstein yesterday. Oh, cool. Well, that's a shame. I mean, if a zombie wolf says this arguing is why I can't sleep in on my weekends. Jesus. I mean, I'm starting to wonder if something's going on there, if she's just going through a hard time. GS says dexterity. We could also, like, invent a rule for tricking the Fae. Also, our difficulty score. Yeah, Witchery says being a teenager is a hard time. That's true. It's a thing that's we're all quick to forget. I'd love to be able to trick them, says Jumpstore. I agree with that. So I'm trying to draw on my memories of this sort of stuff. So... Well, kobolds can fly in Germany. But it's not really helpful here because they would have flown already if they were going to help us. They would have helped themselves, in other words. The creature itself, the spidery man, is not a thing from folklore, so I don't have much to draw in there. GS says Norberg uses Horatio to wrap a string around the spider. You know what we could do? We could say that Norberg choose one of the kobolds free while he distracts the spider. Yeah, it doesn't need to be abuse either. It could just, or at least physical abuse. I mean, it could be other things, but it could also just be a person who is discovering that they are neurospicy. And that's a tough thing when you don't know what's going on and no one seems to understand you. I wish we'd said he had a hat, because we could say that Norberg releases a kobold, but they'll probably just run away. But there's a thing where, like, I can't remember if it's like you take your hat off and you say something to the kobold, it has to come down and do you a favor. I didn't say he had a hat. Maybe he just improvises with a lily pad. Okay. Let's see if it works. I'm gonna roll. What's the difficulty score of this creature? I'll leave that up to you folks. The difficulty ranges are cut off, but easy is 8, moderate is 10, and hard is 12. You can use numbers in between too. You know what? That's a perfect opportunity for a poll. What is the difficulty score of this abomination. Eight, easy. 10, normal. I forget what they called it. Moderate. Hard. 12. There we go. Now, I don't need to know the resolution just yet, but I do have my roll here. I'm not going to tell you guys it. Just yet, anyways. I am going to write up to the point where I need it to succeed or not, and then I will check the voting. The surface above rippled under the spindly limbs, searching the basin of silt and corpses for Norberg. He could not hold his breath a second longer, and thus knew and could feel little Horatio was struggling with the same issue. I haven't even looked, but I just saw a message from Witchery that said, so far your coin would be more useful. So I think I kind of know how the voting's going. And you could feel little Horatio was struggling with the same. So Norberg breached the oily surface of the swamp. Zombie wolf, we already are. But this will be the conclusion of this for now. I mean, we got a good little scene out of this prompt. And if you think I'm not coming back to folklore horror, you are wrong. So Norberg breached the oily surface of the simmering swamp. Jumpstore says, I picked easy because we're not very experienced yet, so I wanted a little guy to get a thrown softball first. That's very kind, although I don't think this game has leveling. So Norberg breached the oily surface of the simmering swamp and gasped. The great pattering form of the fleshy spider cackled and bore down upon him. With little time to think, Norberg gripped Horatio as one might a ball and tossed him over the swollen back of the creature towards the dangling kobolds. Chew 'em! Shouted Norberg. Who then began to dodge strikes. GS says we need folklore horror 5 nights a week. There, I've said it. God, I don't think I could do this 5 nights a week. I don't have that many ideas. Who then began to dodge the strikes of the great heaving beast. Oh, little nugget. You'll make fine boiled strugget. Hissed the wobbling beast as the saliva as the drool breached from between its oozing mandibles. You'll not feel a thing once you feel my sting. GS says, fun fact, my glow-in-the-dark nail polish doesn't even have the faintest glimmer in the dark. Witcher said that's not a fun fact. Ooh, nail polish company. Oh, it was Hira who broke the tie. Alright, we're ending the poll then if it's no longer tied. And it is easy. Well, I already rolled it. I said I wouldn't re-roll it. And there's a +1 with the mouse. So I get to know the results and you get to find it out as I write it. Norberg dipped under the water. Under the lily pads that disguised the great cooking pot. Popping back up like a weasel in the farm. For gasps of breath. The powerful legs of the great wobbling flesh spider. Caught at his jacket and swept him down to the pitted face of an overcooked corpse. He was being pinned down close to where the heat is turning the basin to the bubbles of a simmering stew. Oh dear, we're talking about anime again. When he struggled when the world grew dim. Behind the great creature, as it was drowning, its prey, the little brown mouse, Horatio. Had scurried up onto the poor little kobold stuck to the webbing. The webs were sticky, fruitless fodder for the little mouse's incisors. But it was an abnormally clever mouse. Due to its abnormally advanced years. And so instead, it nibbled a great big hole in the back of the kobold's thick woven shirt. It was then that the kobold fell free onto the deck of its raft. The little fey creature glanced once at the wobbling spider punching into the lily pads, crowning its great big stew pot. Then down at its rescuer, the little brown mouse. And it said, I I owe ye, little mouse, but another day, for I must make quick my getaway. I didn't intend for this many rhymes to happen, but they keep coming to me. Horatio squeaked and squeaked in protest. GS said, little Rory head on big varietal body. I'm not sure what that means. Yes, I like mice. I do. I mean, I guess there isn't really any creature I hate. There are creatures maybe I don't want to be around, but I understand them. But the kobold... bounced up off the raft and flew up into the canopy towards the now moonlit night sky. It's very kind of you to say, Jumpstore. Horatio knew nothing else he could do. But squeak. Oh, I see. This is looking like a shirt, apparently. Okay. It was by pure chance that Norberg slipped the grip of the great spider beast and popped up from the water. With a lily pad on his head. And saw the kobold rising in the sky. Being well learned in his fey tales. Norberg lifted the lily from his head like one might a fine hat, and said, "Oh, little kobold, I could use a hand." And as all kobolds are compelled to help those that lift their hat to them, the kobold had to fly back down, dodging the dangerous beast. And lifting Norberg free, the great spider. When the wheezing little fae landed, he asked if his deed was done. Norberg was clever enough to call to extend his request for a rescue of Horatio. When it was all done, the dark forest stood even more foreboding than before, and the wet gave Norberg a fresh chill. Yet his sister was still missing. And though he could still hear the distant screams and patter of the spider beast in the glade, he pressed on with Horatio, nibbling a seed in his pocket. All right, see what we came up with. Jesus, did we really write that much? That's a lot of writing. If you're just coming to, if you're coming to this part of the show, it's because you just want to know what we came up with. And what we were doing tonight is a bit of an odd one. We were mishmashing the pocket hex mechanics, which is a hex crawl we've done before. We were mashing that up with this sort of sheet I found on itch.io, creator of which I forgot. That was made actually for White Box, I think is the name of it, the OSR system, but it had a bunch of rolling charts that we were using, and the sort of enforced theme that I put over all of this mishmash of mechanics was folklore horror, because I like folklore. So we came up with our kid character, a young boy named Norberg, and his stats are there if you're curious about them. His HP is 10, his inventory load is 8, and his strength was 0, his dex is 1, his intelligence was 2. He went out with his dad's thick leather jacket, a large kitchen knife, and a trained mouse in his pocket. And I'm going to read to you what we came up with, but I'm going to put on better music for this. She was supposed to be back by now. The sun was getting low and melting into ever-saturated hues of rose and citrine. The shadows of the forest were growing black as the void. She had said she knew exactly where the berries grew. She said it would be quick. It had not been quick. Norberg was alone in the family farm, petting his little trained mouse, Horatio, intently. Oh, and intently watching the tree line that wrapped around his family's cornfield. The last glimmers of dusk colored the low clouds. The trees became a black wall. The dark forest was said to be a place rife with strange breaches from the Fey realms. The grove, which stretched as endlessly wide east as it did west, was the backdrop to 1,000 bards' tales of foolish folk meeting strange ends. But she still wasn't back, and he was her brother, so He fetched his mother's sharpest kitchen knife, his father's thickest hide jacket, and slipped Horatio into its pocket. He would have to venture on into the dark woods at dusk. It was nary an hour into his searching, and Norberg's voice was already hoarse from calling for his lost sister. He was growing more timid and quiet, though as the low sun slipped away, painting faint scarlet on the tall tips of the pines, which brought the void. He was growing more timid and quiet, though, as the sun was getting low, or as the sun slipped. That sentence is a mess. That's the problem with writing this in one draft. Painting faint scarlet on the tall tips of the pines, which brought the void of a dark forest to the very point of his nose. Oh, Horatio, why didn't we bring along a torch or something? Norberg whispered to the mouse in his pocket. Horatio squeaked, and Norberg felt this was a judgment from the little rodent, and hissed, well, I didn't hear you offer up that advice when I could act on it now, did I? The darkness brought every sound closer. Every whisper of wind across the feathers of a diving owl was as if Norberg was the prey it swooped upon. Every crack of a stick under the paw of some unseen beast sounded as if it were right before him, and every whisper of a voice was right in his ear. Norberg froze in place. His feet were now sinking into the thick mud of the Swiftglade swamp. He dared not move, though, for there was a whisper in his ear, and it formed the words, Thirsty boy needs a drink, I think. The swamp was thick with a fog. He felt most in how it chilled the air, though the glass glimmers of sunset were suspended in its haze as well. From the corner of his eye near the center of the swamp, he saw the silhouette of a many-legged creature. It moved as he moved and stood still as he did. He turned to discern it better through the fog, but it was as if the veil was drawn closed when he looked straight on at it. No, he only saw the crawling things about him in the edges of his sight, catching the sunlight and slipping into the fog before he could grasp their nature. Skinny things can do, if they fatten up on stew, whispered something into his other ear. The spittle of overwhelming saliva dripped down his neck, and the hot breath gave way back to the cool fog. Horatio squeaked at that a few times, which was confirmation enough that this was not in his imagination. The patter of feet, each slapping along the mud behind him, told him that something was circling. He could not stand there sinking in the mud any longer. The flurry of whispers, slapping feet, and spittle across his neck compelled him to pull his steps from the sucking mud and slowly push forward. As he did, the shadows in the corner of his eye grew larger, and he turned and curved back towards the center of the swamp, away from it. His steps needed to stretch higher as the looser soil sunk him deeper. The weeds grabbed at his feet, and somewhere in the breathless hustle, his shoes were stolen, leaving his toes to feel the writhing critters that infested the swamp basin. Still, the shadows creeping in the corner of his eye faded as he stepped towards the center of the swamp. So he continued on into the fog until the lilies were brushing at his chin and Horatio had retreated to his head. The deadfall in the swamp startled him as it bumped past in the pitch black. The writhing basin burrowed into his toes, and the weeds pulled at his legs as if to drown him. It was then Horatio let out a squeak, and the pair saw the fog turn a milky white, as if some dim candlelight lay ahead, bouncing on his tiptoes to keep his mouth from the foul-smelling water. Norberg whispered, "Is, someone there? On a raft?" And as if being summoned from his own imagination, a raft floated into view. On it was a steaming pot stuck out the top with the thick handle of a crudely whittled ladle. A small gray hand, as stubby and misshapen as a toddler's, was stirring it. The raft moved on a lazy breeze that stirred the fogged swirls around the back fat candle illuminating its deck. And it did, as it did, the cooking pot slowly pulled past and revealed a small but tired-looking little creature with a cone hat, sagging in the humidity of its own cooking. It looked down at the swamp where Norberg, with the mouse upon his head, was treading water. Its eyes reflected the candle like a cat's might, and in the fog around him, Norberg now perceived a dozen further pairs of yellow eyes lighting up. It was a strange town of these shrunken folk, much like the one stirring the stew, but each looked more tired than curious as they floated by in their odd thatched buildings suspended on rafts. The first spooned a ladle from the pot and quietly said, "I offer some stew. If you'll pass me the driftwood near you." Norberg knew his tales well enough to not be so foolish as to eat the food of the Fae, and yet he did not wish to upset the kobold, and so waved away the stew, explaining he was full of bread anyway already, but grabbed the soft, swampy wood and handed it to him. And it was then, in the dim candlelight that painted the fog white, that Norberg saw the driftwood was the cyanotic limb of some dismembered man. Before he could drop it in horror, though, something rose out of the water behind the tired little kobold and snapped the limb from his hand with its great jaws. This creature was the shape of it was then the shape of things became more clear. The kobolds were stuck with long strands of a viscous fluid and dangling from the canopy of their town over the deep swamp. Arising from the water was a many-eyed and many-limbed creature with pale, porous skin and the mandibles of a great wolf spider. As the creature rose up from the shadows and depths of the swamp, tapping its limbs across the deck of the raft, Norberg understood it to be a sort of pink-fleshed spider the size of a cottage. The Fae it had trapped to either feed on or draw folks in with, it seemed, and the slapping steps from the shore were from its most comical feature, a foot with 5 toes upon the ends of every one of its spidery limbs. "But you'll be so tasty if you got a bit fatter, little meat man," the creature whispered, the kobold dangling around him with fear in their eyes and the wet of tears on their cheek. "A little stew for my stew." It was then that the swamp began to warm, and Horatio squeaked repeatedly. It was, after all, no swamp at all. He had tread into a great big stew pot buried in the glade of the forest. The spider cackled as the fog turned to steam, Take a deep one, Horatio, Norberg blurted out and cupped his hand over his head and dove underneath into the grim water. And down there, as the basin grew bright orange from the building heat, Norberg could now perceive that the grasping vines were the web-bound bodies of unfortunate souls that had wandered into this trap. Their eyes were cloudy, and some had clearly been chewed upon, simmering for an eternity in this disguised swamp. The surface above rippled under the spindly, searching limbs of the creature, searching through the basin of silt and corpses for Norberg. He could not hold his breath a second longer, though, and could feel little Horatio was struggling with the same, and so Norberg breached the oily surface of the simmering swamp and gasped. The great pattering form of the fleshy spider cackled and bore down upon him, and with little time to think, Norberg gripped Horatio as one might a ball and tossed him over the swollen back of the creature towards the dangling kobolds, saying, "Chew 'em!" shouted Norberg, who then began to dodge the strikes of that great heaving beast. "Oh, little nugget, you'll make a fine boiled struggit," hissed the wobbling beast as the drool breached from between its oozing mandibles. "You'll not feel a thing once you feel my sting." Norberg dipped under the lily pads that disguised the great cooking pot, popping back up like a weasel in the farm for gasps of breath. The powerful legs of the great wobbling flesh spider caught at his jacket, though, and swept Norberg down to the pitted face of an overcooked corpse tied down at the bottom. He was being drowned, close to where the heat was turning the basin to the bubbles of a simmering stew, and the world was growing dim. Behind the great creature, as it was drowning its prey, the little brown mouse, Horatio, had scurried up onto the poor little kobold stuck to the webbing. The webs were sticky and proved fruitless fodder for the little mouse's incisors. But it was an abnormally clever mouse due to its abnormally advanced years, and so instead it nibbled a great big hole in the back of the kobold's thick woven shirt. It was then that the kobold fell free onto the deck of its raft. The little fey creature glanced once at the wobbling spider, punching into the lily pads, crowning its great big stew pot, and then the kobold looked down. Down at its rescuer, the little brown mouse, and it said, I owe ye, little mouse, but another day, for I must make quick my getaway." And Horatio squeaked and squeaked in protest, but the kobold bounced up off the raft and flew up into the canopy towards the now moonlit night sky. Horatio knew nothing else he could do but squeak, for he was merely a mouse. It was by pure chance that Norberg had slipped the grip of the great spider beast and popped up from the water with a lily pad on his head when he saw the kobold rising up into the night sky. Being well learned in his fey tales, Norberg lifted the lily from his head like one might a fine hat and said, "Oh, little kobold, I could use a hand." And as all kobolds are compelled to help those that lift their head to them as they fly, the kobold had to fly back down, dodging the dangerous beast, swatting with its limbs, and lifting Norberg free of the great spider's drowning grasp. And when the wheezing little fay landed, he asked if his deed was done, but Norberg was clever to extend his request for a rescue of Horatio, the little brown mouse, back on the raft. And when it was all done, the dark forest stood even more foreboding than before, and the wet gave Norberg a fresh chill. Yet his sister was still missing, and though he could still hear the distant screams and patter of the spider beast in the glade, he pressed on with Horatio nibbling a seed in his pocket. GS says, "We were fooled. We've been in a stew pot the whole time." Yes. Jumpstore says, "I realized I either have reached my 1-year anniversary with this channel or am approaching it. Remember seeing a stream or two before Halloween stream, and I wish I could remember the title." The most likely one from last year was The is that the C one? You're right that it's been a year. I do remember that. Let me double check there for a minute. I had a lot of fun writing this. It's a shame I can't just do this all month. Just gotta look at my Halloween playlist. Videos. So the most popular one I did last year was the Weird Tales of Old Cryptids. It's one of my most popular videos. 5 short tales about German monsters and folklore, but I think you came in on the vampire one. Because I did Tales of the Vile Blood-Sucking Undead of Folklore. I think that's where you came in. Because I don't think you came in... I don't think anybody really watched my Sheridan Le Fanu one about Laura Silverbell, which is a shame because Laura Silverbell was a great story, but it just didn't catch. Oh. Well, I mean, thank you for all your contributions over the last year. You've been a great person to have in the audience. As I was to have, of course, Witchery and Zombie Wolf, Genera and Uncle Kitty and Lizzie Rose more recently. There's a few that we had last year as well that we don't see around as much anymore, but I still appreciate the time they gave me. GS says, well-rounded story, Rory. Thank you. Jumpstore says, I remember Rory said the bread was crying out, I am well-baked, and I thought it would be funny to say, lol, samesies. Well, that sounds like a lit game. In which case, I have less of a memory for the lit games I've done. But anyways, the... Just that a bit. Yeah, there we go. That was sort of my mishmash to do some folklore horror. If you're a person who makes games, I don't know, maybe we should make it at some point. The thing that I tried to find was what's called an oracle, which you use in solo tabletop RPGs for prompts and direction and stuff. I was trying to find an oracle themed around folklore horror, and I just couldn't find it. So maybe after this month, maybe we'll do a stream where we create a list of prompts and stuff and put them up on itch.io. My goal, by the way, is to have the Squid King's Caverns done by the end of the month. Or at least done enough that I'm comfortable with putting it up on itch.io and people can try it out. We wrote that a few months back as an add-on for Troves, which was a game I really liked so much, so I did 3 streams on it. Which there's a playlist for if you want to see them. Oh. Ah. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, I like it when people read out my comments. But also, like, you know, the structure of the show is supposed to be the sense of community. Like, I don't feel like I'm getting on a stage and showing off. Maybe it comes across that way, but that's not my intention. I mostly like to for us to feel like we're all doing something together. Anyways, that's enough blabbing from me. It's already been 2.5 hours and I gotta go pick someone up. So thank you so much if you stuck through the whole thing, and if you didn't make it the whole way, that's fine. That was a long stream. If you do like this though, if you need the background or you just want to know more about solo tabletop RPGs, I have a whole playlist, the Varietal Show it's called, of stuff. Maybe start with the newest and go back, because it, you know, there's a point at which the quality drops off because I was still figuring out what I was doing. But on the other hand, if you like folklore, if that's why you're here, my God, I have so much folklore I've read, and it's not the stuff you've heard before. I promise you, some of it was only translated like weeks before I read it. Yeah, I'm friends with some translators, or acquaintances at least, online. We read a lot of folklore and we have a lot of fun with it. You should absolutely do that. Oh, the trivia. Oh dear. I nearly committed the only sin I can commit. Zombie Wolf's random trivia. The origins of Halloween known as Samhain? Is that what she said last week? Somebody tell me if that's right. Means summer's end, and was originally a feast held in November on the last day of the fall harvest, where they celebrated the day the veil between the lands of the living and the dead were the thinnest by lighting, I assume not lightning, sacrificial bonfires and wearing costumes to trick the returning spirits. Orange and black were typically worn, as black represented death and orange represented life of the fall season and the harvest. There's Jumpstore correctly predicting. I wonder if Rory will remember that Lizzie Rose said Samhain is pronounced like Samhain. Probably not. I still don't think I'm getting that right. Anyhow, thank you so much if you chose to lurk. Lizzie Rose said you got it right. Oh, I didn't know you were here, Lizzie. It's good to see you. Or maybe I did and I forgot. Anyways. Some people says, thank you, Rory. I was worried there for a second. Thank you so much if you chose to lurk. And otherwise, if you like this stuff, hey, maybe consider hanging out with another stream. Otherwise, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Get out of my shop!